When things go well for Spider-Man, they often don't go so well for Peter Parker, especially when it comes to his love life. And while Peter has had a few of his own not so great moments, his many girlfriends have done him wrong on a few occasions as well. Now, one of Peter Parker's biggest red flags when it comes to the dating scene is the fact that he just mysteriously has to run off at the last second, or miss countless dates, or seems really distracted, or just not as invested as a typical romantic partner should be. And well, that's because he's Spider-Man. Having a dual life is never going to be easy on romantic relationships. While Peter has managed to make it work from time to time, especially when he actually tells his partners about the fact that he is Spider-Man, he has had multiple people dump him for it. This is first up on our list today because honestly, it's extremely fair for people to leave him for seeming to not be invested and present in his relationships, or even leave him for being a vigilante. Sissy Ironwood, Betty Brant, Deborah Whitman to a degree, and even Carly Cooper just couldn't really deal with Peter having such a busy life, and for Carly, it was him actually being Spider-Man that did it. But while Peter has had many love interests, Gwen Stacy is arguably Peter Parker's true greatest love. Before even MJ, Gwen and Peter shared a very, very real love that was viciously taken away in a story so iconic that Marvel has never really brought Gwen Stacy back. But they sure as heck used Gwen to mess with Peter many a times. For example, 2016/2017's Dead No More: The Clone Conspiracy. In this story, a masked man initially thought to be the Jackal recruits villains to work for him by reuniting them with lost loved ones who he has made by cloning. The Jackal clones Gwen Stacy and brings her on board with his plans by telling her that she and the others aren't clones at all, but rather the originals harvested from remains, which is why they're able to remember everything from their previous life. Now, Gwen Clone is obviously hesitant until convinced by seeing her reanimated father again. Gwen initially agrees to work with the Jackal, and though she does later turn against him, her siding with him in the first place set in motion a lot of eventual pain and heartbreak, and that lands Clone Gwen on the naughty list of people that hurt Peter Parker. But while Gwen is one of Peter's first real loves, Lian Tang is a more recent girlfriend of Spider-Man. After Peter Parker regained control of his body from Otto Octavius during the Superior Spider-Man arc, Peter helped raise Parker Industries into a powerhouse company, and he began operating out of his base in Shanghai, where he started dating a scientific designer named Lian Tang. Lian even helped to create the Spider-Mobile for Spider-Man, but alas, this romance still fell in the end, and it was because it was eventually revealed that she was covertly working for the villain Scorpio, who led the evil organization Zodiac, providing him with Parker Industries security codes in exchange for medication for her sick mother's treatments. When Scorpio threatened to have her disposed of as a loose end, she offered to bring Spider-Man to the pearly gates for Scorpio. She attempted to kill Spider-Man during Shen Quango's award ceremony, but she couldn't actually go through with it. Spider-Man did eventually forgive Lian for her betrayal, and she became his assistant as Spider Rider near the fall of Parker Industries, but there was no recovering the romantic relationship. Now, after Mephisto erased Peter's marriage to Mary Jane in that storyline, which we won't talk about, Peter had a new life and ended up being roommates with one Vin Gonzalez, a police officer who was partners with Carly Cooper, who is another one of Peter's eventual short-lived relationships. But before that even happened, there was Michelle Gonzalez. Michelle was Vin's sister, and even though she and Parker did not like each other at first, at all, and Michelle was initially super critical of Peter Parker, they started to date anyways after a pretty drunken one-night stand in Amazing Spider-Man number 601, and thanks to the villain Chameleon orchestrating some events behind the scenes. She then surprisingly became extremely overpossessive of Peter until Chameleon showed up and came between them, causing more problems until Michelle finally left for Chicago in a blaze of glory. Now, I mentioned Deborah Whitman in the first point, but there's so much more to Deborah's story. Peter met Deborah Whitman when he was a teaching assistant at Empire State University, and she was a secretary. But the relationship really became more frequent in Spectacular Spider-Man, where she and Peter began to date after issue number 46. Now, due to Deborah actually having a husband who was far from good to her, plus some mental instability that she was going through, and delusions of Peter being Spider-Man, which he was, Peter eventually helped her by dressing up as Spider-Man, and she ended up divorcing her husband and leaving Peter and New York for a better life. Now, fast forward to the aftermath of Peter Parker revealing his secret identity to the world during Civil War, and Deborah, she returns having written a new tell-all book titled, quote, Two-Faced: How Spider-Man Ruined My Life. Now, even though she seemed discouraged about the title and tone of the book, she's still committed to a book signing. Deborah eventually revealed to Betty Brant that the editors had forced her to exaggerate the mental damage that Peter had done to her in order to make for a better book. On top of that, Deborah's mother had been sick and the medical bills were far more than she could pay for, so when the Daily Bugle dug up all of Peter Parker's past relationships to get some dirt on him, she just jumped on the chance to write the book. It's just not a very nice thing to do, like, at all. It's pretty easy to say that Felicia Hardy, the sometimes hero, mainly villain known as Black Cat, is one of Peter Parker's most toxic relationships in so many different ways. But despite that, it's actually quite clear that Felicia really did have strong feelings for Peter, or I should say for Spider-Man. So much so that she was willing to literally attack Mary Jane Watson. Following Felicia breaking off her relationship with Peter and running off to Europe, she returns and is eventually informed by Venom that Peter and MJ are now married and living together. So what does she do? Full of jealous rage, she decides that she's going to get revenge on the pair of them by first of all dating Peter's friend Flash Thompson, trying to make Peter jealous, but then she breaks into their new Soho apartment and literally attacks MJ, threatening her and being an absolute nutter. Eventually, Felicia would repair her relationship with both Peter and MJ, but man, she was insane. But on the topic of Black Cat, her and Spider-Man did actually have a few romantic run-ins before they fully started a relationship and partnership in the Spectacular Spider-Man number 75. The only problem was this was strictly between Black Cat and Spidey, not Black Cat and Peter. Spider-Man met Felicia's mother and was introduced as Felicia's boyfriend. However, Spider-Man never revealed his secret identity to his girlfriend, and it was also kind of clear that Black Cat was really only attracted to Spider-Man while he knew pretty much everything about her. As the relationship progressed, naturally, she became more curious about the man underneath the mask. He eventually revealed his backstory, origins, and motivations to Black Cat before finally unmasking himself in the Spectacular Spider-Man number 87. And this girl was straight up repulsed by him. She did not love this nerdy kid Peter Parker. She just loved the heroic Spider-Man. This ultimately led Peter to dump Black Cat in the Spectacular Spider-Man number 100. But there's another side to that story which leads to my next point. Now, 2 issues after Spider-Man revealed his secret identity to Black Cat, Felicia came right back to him. Only this was when it was revealed to Spider-Man that the bad luck superpowers that she seemed to have were actually not real at all, after she got pretty badly injured fighting Dr. Octopus. This then gave Spider-Man pause as he didn't want to put Black Cat in harm's way as they fought crime, and she felt kind of inferior because she didn't have powers. So, in response, she tried to buy superpowers. Seeking out scientific superheroes to help her, she ended up working with a very shady stranger who was actually working for Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. And by experimenting on Black Cat, they activated some latent genes, which actually did give her bad luck superpowers. Blam Blams would backfire on those who tried to take shots at her. Anyone trying to sneak up on her would trip on their own feet. It was kind of cool, but unfortunately, these powers also seemed to affect her superhero boyfriend. The longer Spider-Man spent around the Black Cat, the more Felicia's bad luck powers attached a hex to Spider-Man, infecting him with bad luck that caused him to trip, fall, forget how to use his powers, and even get caught up in his own webs. In order to actually protect him, Felicia tried to break up with Peter, but like I said in the last point, Peter beat her to the punch. This next one, our second to last, is kind of hard because it's kind of difficult to blame MJ for her choices here. The current run of Spider-Man comics has caused quite the angry uproar from fans, partially for the way Peter is portrayed, but also because Marvel just absolutely refuses to let him just be happy with Mary Jane Watson. The character of Paul Rabin is not a villain, but you bet your socks many fans see him as the true enemy to Peter Parker due to him being the new Mr. Steal Your Girl. So basically, at the beginning of this newest run, Spider-Man and Mary Jane get transported to an alternate dimension, with Peter eventually making it back, but Mary Jane being stuck there. Peter does everything in his power to try and rescue Mary Jane, but while this only takes him a couple of days, in this alternate reality, it's actually been 4 whole years. In those 4 years, Mary Jane had met and fallen in love with Paul Rabin, and they even had 2 children together. Needless to say, when she finally gets rescued and comes back to Earth 616 with Paul and kids in tow, she doesn't want to just abandon this new life and go back to Peter. It's utterly heartbreaking for the wall crawler, and God, I hate it. Just let them be happy. But finally, as I said earlier on this list, Gwen Stacy was arguably the greatest love in Peter Parker's life, and while Marvel hasn't really resurrected her at all in order to respect the story that she passed away in, they seem to have no problem taking her name, dragging it through the mud, throwing it in a sack, and beating it with a hammer. While the Sins Past storyline was eventually sort of retconned and is pretty much entirely forgotten by the stories that came after it and the fans, it still happened, and that is sin enough for us to talk about. This is the story where it was revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. And if that weren't bad enough, the affair resulted in Gwen and Norman having children together. 2 twins that were raised in secret by Osborn. These twins, the affair, and Gwen threatening to not allow Norman to see those twins became the new reason why the Green Goblin orchestrated the passing of Gwen Stacy way back in the day. And then, those 2 twins, yeah, they ended up gaining superpowers thanks to Osborn's altered DNA and growing up extremely fast to become the same age as Peter Parker himself. The twins were then deceived by Osborn into thinking that Peter Parker was their real father and was responsible for their mother's death, and so they struck out to try and bring him down. It was all incredibly dumb and unnecessary and almost destroyed the character of Gwen Stacy.
Coming in at number 10, we have the time Peter grew and then lost 4 additional arms, literally making him an 8-limbed freak. This event took place during a period of time in which being Spider-Man had brought Peter nothing but pain, with Gwen Stacy's father having recently passed away, and Gwen believing Spider-Man to be responsible. Thus, Peter decided to get rid of his double life by developing a serum to remove his spider abilities. Unfortunately, testing serums on yourself rarely works out in the Marvel Universe, and Peter's spider powers are amplified to the point that 4 additional arms burst forth out of his body. And while Spider-Man would eventually be able to balance out his life and lose the additional limbs, it's still a bizarre tale of body horror that Peter is lucky to have gotten out of unscathed. Coming in at number 9, we have getting trampled by the Rhino in the video game Spider-Man Miles Morales. This game is one of my favorites of the last couple years, and it opens with both Peter Parker and Miles Morales working together as Spider-Men to try and transport the Rhino safely to the supervillain prison. Unfortunately, the Rhino breaks free, and the opening tutorial of the game is trying to chase the villain down and stop his rampage. Unfortunately, since this is just the tutorial, Peter Parker does most of the fighting and winds up getting his butt kicked, getting hit with attacks that should definitely have shattered at least half the bones in his body. Luckily, Miles is eventually able to save the day by discovering his Venom Blast ability, but it's still a wonder how Spidey is able to even stand after all of that pummeling. Coming in at number 8, we have Firebrand burning Peter Parker alive. During another period where Spider-Man was a bit off his game, he got into a fight with the usually low-level villain Firebrand. Unfortunately, Spider-Man's taunts during the fight pushed Firebrand over the edge, causing him to fully unleash his power and blow up a city block. The resulting explosion was shown in graphic detail to burn both Peter's costume and his flesh, and the only reason he was able to survive without permanent scarring was due to the quick intervention of a hospital that usually only treats supervillains. I guess one perk of getting most of your face burnt off is that the doctors won't know exactly who they're healing. Nicely handled, Spider-Man. Coming in at number 7, we have the time Spider-Man had to take on the entire Sinister Six at once in the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man video game. After a breakout at the supervillain prison The Raft, Peter is faced with his worst nightmare when he's surrounded by the combined team of the Rhino, the Vulture, Scorpion, Electro, and Mr. Negative, who are more than enough to weaken Spider-Man before the arrival of the leader of the Sinister Six, Dr. Octopus, who up until this point had been a friend and mentor to this universe's Peter Parker. The betrayal cuts Peter deep, and his wounded body is thrown into New York Harbor, only barely surviving by holding on to a floating oil drum. This beatdown was so bad, Peter eventually needed a specialized costume to be strong enough to go up against Doc Ock once more. Coming in at number 6, we have the time that Spider-Man was tortured by the dark ancient sorcerer Kulan Goth. During a comic event that saw the entire city of Manhattan transformed into an alternate medieval fantasy version, Spider-Man was one of the few heroes who remembered the world as it truly was. As punishment for rebelling against Kulan Goth's rule, this version of Spider-Man was tortured and put on display for all of Kulan Goth's enemies to see. And while Spider-Man would eventually be restored once Kulan Goth was defeated and reality reverted back to normal, it's still incredibly disturbing to see one of Marvel's greatest heroes being put in such a violent situation. Coming in at number 5, we have the time Peter Parker became a literal spider monster. We've already covered a storyline on this list where Peter grew some extra limbs, but during an event in which the concept of the spider totems was first introduced into the Marvel mythology, Peter Parker found himself transformed into a gigantic spider-human hybrid, with horrifying mandibles and a hunger for human flesh. Eventually, this creature would appear to die and then be reborn as a fresh Peter Parker, now possessing organic web shooters. While this may have just been a really convoluted storyline to make Spidey's web status the same as the Tobey Maguire movies, it's still a body horror storyline that makes my skin crawl. Coming in at number 4, we have the time that Spider-Man lifted an entire building and lived to tell the tale. In one of the most iconic, defining moments for the entire character, Spider-Man found himself trapped under the rubble of a collapsed building, with water rapidly filling the area as well. In order to save the life of his Aunt May, Peter had to lift the weight of the entire building off of his back. This is the pivotal moment where Spider-Man showed just how strong he could be when the situation called for it, and just how far he was willing to push his body to save the lives of the people he loves, something that would go on to become a defining feature of the character. But seriously, Peter, you should probably get someone to spot you the next time you lift something that heavy. Coming in at number 3, we have the time that Deadpool accidentally killed and then resurrected Spider-Man twice. After a complicated series of events led to Deadpool being hired to kill his friend Spider-Man and being convinced that Peter had turned to evil, the Merc with a Mouth shot Peter Parker in the head unexpectedly at his apartment. This would be a pretty anticlimactic end to the spectacular Spider-Man, however, and Deadpool eventually convinced his demon girlfriend of the time to resurrect his buddy, because comic books are weird like that. In a comedic twist, Deadpool would shoot Peter again after briefly thinking that he had once more turned to evil, but eventually everyone wound up alive and safe, even if this would continue to be one of the weirdest situations in Spider-Man's very weird history. Coming in at number 2, we have the so-called death of the Ultimate Spider-Man. In the comic book event that would lead to the debut of Miles Morales, the Peter Parker of the Ultimate Marvel Universe had to die before a new Spider-Man could rise. In a final battle against his nemesis, the Green Goblin, the teenage Peter Parker protected his family against Norman Osborn's relentless and crazed attacks, even after he'd already been mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet. While at the time this seemed like a tragic and dramatic end to the Ultimate Peter Parker, it would eventually be revealed that he actually survived this intense battle, as the Oz formula that gave him his spider abilities also functionally made this Peter Parker immortal. Maybe it's just a weird comic book retcon, but the fact that Peter survived so many injuries is truly mind-blowing, and I can't wait to see where the Ultimate Universe takes us next. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have Spider-Man's head-crushing defeat in the original Infinity Gauntlet event. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we may have all gotten our hearts broken by that classic, "I don't want to go, Mr. Stark," but the battle for the Infinity Gauntlet in the comics may have been even more brutal to Peter Parker than we'd ever want to see on the big screen. In the comics, Peter is able to briefly get the upper hand on Thanos with some web attacks to the face, but is then viciously beaten by Thanos' lady companion, Taraxia, who is shown to kill the wall crawler by attacking him with a rock. Pretty brutal for a Cosmic Marvel event. And while by the end of Infinity Gauntlet all of the killed heroes would be restored, this might just be one of the most bone-crushing losses ever suffered by Spider-Man.
Number 10, Unmasking. During the events of Civil War, Spider-Man ultimately decided to side with Iron Man, and to prove how loyal he was to the cause, he even decided to publicly unmask, to show just how much he believed in his friend Tony Stark and the idea of the Superhuman Registration Act. However, this turned out to be the wrong choice for Peter in the end. Not only was his life at risk as a result of his choice, and as a result of ultimately changing his mind, but also the lives of those he loved were threatened as well. Peter Parker almost ended up being shot to death at the behest of Kingpin, who put a hit out on him, and as a result of surviving that, being nearly missed, Aunt May instead ended up taking a bullet and almost lost her life, being put into intensive care. Peter Parker would also end up losing his marriage after he and Mary Jane made a deal with Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life. So really, it's pretty impressive that Peter managed to survive this whole overall fairly awful ordeal, both when it comes to keeping his life and keeping his sanity. Number 9, witnessing Aunt May's romance. During a time where Peter swapped bodies with Dr. Octopus, he found himself trapped in his body and in Dr. Ock's mind. Because of this, Peter ended up forced to watch a memory that Otto had of a night of passion with Peter's own Aunt May before their almost wedding at the time. Sure, Peter has survived a lot of physical beatings and extremely devastating disasters, but the emotional trauma of this one, I do not know how he did it. Peter obviously did not want to see this, and yet he was forced to. And still afterward, he manages to be able to look both Otto and Aunt May in the eye when he needs to. I do not know how though. Not only did Peter survive this, by the way, but also survived witnessing all the beatings from Otto's perspective that he, as Spider-Man, had given him via Otto's memories. That is some mental and emotional durability right there. Although I guess this version of Peter kind of died, as he only managed to survive via his subconscious after this. Here's hoping he managed to forget this at least. Somehow. Maybe because only his subconscious kind of survived, his consciousness of this is like, boop, gone. I hope so. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about some more crazy things that Spider-Man has survived, there's lots out there, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, electrocuted and thrown from a skyscraper. During the events of Marvel Knight's Spider-Man, as early as the 3rd issue in, Spider-Man gets badly beaten and ends up in such a bad way that he is rushed to the ER. This all happens after Aunt May has seemingly been kidnapped. In this much darker take on Spider-Man's world, as written by Mark Miller, Spider-Man confronts Electro and the Vulture, suspecting they may have been involved. During this fight, Spider-Man gets badly electrocuted more than once by Electro. In fact, at one point he is so severely and dramatically electrocuted that he ends up being flinged from a skyscraper and plummets to the ground, before he can recover enough to even shoot a web and swing to safety. Instead, he smashes all the way down and through a cab, knocked unconscious and badly injured. The paramedics then rush him to the hospital. That is how severely Electro injured him. Of course, this is Spider-Man, and somehow, miraculously, he manages to survive, but whew, it was definitely a close call. Number 7, Sinister War. Sinister War also really scrambled Spider-Man up. I mean, what's worse than one team of 6 sinister villains? How about a whole bunch of Sinister 6 teams? Which is exactly the trial that Peter faced during Sinister War. Pretty much all all of the villains he came up against seemed to also want Spider-Man for one reason or another. And while some fought to actually protect Spidey, many more were fighting to harm, capture, or perhaps even kill him. Needless to say, it was one long night for Spider-Man, with him dealing with fight after fight to the point that he couldn't even catch his breath. Number 6. Missile Explosion. During issues 523 and 524 of The Amazing Spider-Man, we learned that Spider-Man managed to survive the explosion of a massive missile that was filled with toxins. Not only did we see Peter survive the explosion, but he also survived the fallout after being saved by Iron Man. Stark secured Peter and took him back to the Avengers mansion as quickly as possible so that he could treat him for the toxins he had been exposed to and his injuries. Fortunately, Peter is so durable, with such a tough immune system apparently, that he was able to fight off most of the effects until Stark managed to treat him. And in so doing, Stark saved his life. It's pretty convenient. He also happened to arrive at just the right time, as Peter was also about to fall at terminal velocity into the ocean, the impact of which could have killed him. Quite lucky that he's so tough and that Iron Man arrived in the nick of time. That all worked out pretty well. Number 5. The Wrath of the SRA. Spider-Man not only impressively survived unmasking for his pal Tony Stark during the events of Civil War, but he also managed to survive betraying Tony as well. When Spider-Man got a good look at the camp Stark's side of the war were running, he realized that he had made the wrong choice, and attempted to walk out. Iron Man, however, isn't ready to let Peter go, and attempts to stop him. He tries to tell S.H.I.E.L.D. to just bring Spider-Man in quietly, as all Tony wants to do is talk to him. He doesn't want to fight, but S.H.I.E.L.D., under the Superhuman Registration Act, denies Stark's request and attempts to have Spider-Man apprehended and arrested, sending the top secret Thunderbolts team that they have amassed after Spider-Man. They send Jack-O-Lantern and Jester the Third, and if it weren't for the interference of Punisher, he may have ended up dead at their hands. Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. was ready to rein in their team members when it came to how much force they were using, but still, they already kind of almost killed Spider-Man at that point, putting him in critical condition by the time Punisher showed up to save him. You can see the fight and the shape that Peter is in by the end of it in issue number 5 of the first Civil War series. Number 4. Beat Down by Morlun. During the story The Other, Peter seemed to be suffering from and ultimately dying of a mysterious illness. While struggling with this, Morlun decided to pay Spider-Man a visit just to basically torment him. Focused on his potential impending death, Spider-Man is caught unawares when Morlun attacks him while he's swinging around the city attempting to clear his mind. The two have an insanely explosive fight, but just as Peter thinks he has the upper hand, Morlun brutally defeats him. He plucks out Spider-Man's eye and eats it, and then beats him to within an inch of his life. Spider-Man manages to survive this attack despite him losing an eye and being beaten to a pulp by Morlun. Number 3. Killed by Kraven. In reality, Kraven never really killed Peter, although we were meant to believe that he had killed Spider-Man. I mean, it definitely looked like he had killed Spider-Man. Kraven at one point sets out in Kraven's last hunt to beat Spider-Man by replacing him and proving that he is better than Spider-Man is. However, in the end, he begins to question if he's truly beaten Spider-Man, and who actually makes a better Spider. He realizes that there is no one quite like Peter Parker when it comes to being Spider-Man, just as Spider-Man himself seemingly returns from the dead. In truth, Kraven had merely administered a drug that had made Peter seem dead, probably slowing his heart rate, definitely making him trip out, and putting him in a stasis for a few weeks. Spider-Man, however, was buried alive by Kraven and wakes up in his grave. Pretty sure he was also shot point blank by Kraven, but anyways. Spider-Man then has to dig his way out and find his way back to the villain for that final confrontation. The story ends with Kraven taking his own life, believing he had finally accomplished everything in his life that he had set out to do. But don't worry, Kraven would come back, because Kraven. Number 2. Body Failure. Another time that Peter Parker died, it was actually as Dr. Otto Octavius. During the time of Superior Spider-Man, Otto got a hold of Peter's body by tricking him into a body swap. With Peter's consciousness stuck in Otto's old failing body, when it died, so seemingly did Spider-Man. I mean, we still had Peter's body, but for now, Otto was the one behind the steering wheel. Fortunately, while Peter did kind of die, he also managed to survive, as Otto was unable to wipe Peter's complete consciousness clean from his own body, and his subconscious kinda lingered there. In the end, Otto gave up his own hold over Spider-Man's body in order to let Peter Parker reclaim his body and his mantle once more. Otto was compelled to do this when he realized that even with all that he had done, he could never truly be a better Spider-Man than Peter because he was kind of missing the moral compass, which was part of what truly made Peter Parker superior. Also, he needed Peter's help because he was like, I'm trying to save the woman I love and it's like impossible, please. I need the real Spider-Man, help. Number 1. Annihilation of his universe. Miles Morales didn't just survive the death or a bad beatdown, but actually managed to survive the destruction of his entire universe. Following the events of Secret Wars and the creation and dissolution of Emperor Doom's Battleworld, Miles Morales somehow managed to survive after his entire reality of Earth 1610 was pretty much completely destroyed. How? Well, Miles Morales' Spider-Man managed to earn a new life for his family and himself on the reinstated reality of Earth 616, all because of an act of kindness in combination with a weird quirk. Molecule Man had been asking for a snack, and Miles happened to have a burger in the pocket of his suit, which he gave him. As a result, Molecule Man decided to make sure when the universe was recreated, using his powers, that Miles and his family had a place in it. How nice. He also gave Miles' uncle Aaron Davis a new lease on life in the Earth 616 reality as well. Pretty sure he also brought his mom back to life too. Earth 1610 has returned since its destruction, and one of its other survivors, the Maker, even managed to return to it. But at the time, it wasn't around. So, still pretty cool that Miles survived that.
Coming in at number 10 today is Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter's comic book tale seemingly came to an end in one of the most shocking Spider-Man stories ever. Kraven's last hunt finally sees the Hunter get the drop on Spider-Man. Sticking Spidey in the neck with a dart and then burying Spider-Man 6 feet under, Kraven actually beat his adversary, which only a handful of villains can actually claim to have accomplished. Thinking Peter Parker is down and out, Kraven weirdly then takes on Spider-Man's costume, or a copy of the black Spider-Man costume, and he hunts down criminals. In an attempt to prove himself that he's better than Spider-Man, he defeated Vermin, a villain that Spider-Man couldn't defeat without help from Captain America. Unfortunately, the whole thing still ends in tragedy for Kraven. Spider-Man digs himself out of the grave and renders Kraven's victory kind of moot, but Kraven also had accomplished his main goal by besting Spider-Man, something that not a lot of people can confidently say, like I said. Convincing himself that he has no reason to live anymore, Kraven chooses to defeat himself permanently. Number 9. Morlun. Coming Home was a Spider-Man story written by J. Michael Straczynski that introduced readers to a fresh new mystical adversary named Morlun. Now, Morlun was an energy vampire who thrived on the life forces of individuals who were powered up by animal totems, and the spider totems, like Spider-Man, were his favorite. In every aspect, Morlun surpassed Spider-Man. He possessed superior strength, speed, and thousands of years of experience. Although Spider-Man managed to emerge victorious in their initial encounter, he couldn't deny the intensity of the battle. So, of course, in their second confrontation, Morlun proved to be absolutely devastating. Morlun dominated Spider-Man, leaving him battered and broken like never before. Morlun even managed to send Spider-Man off with a round-trip ticket to the pits of Tartarus. Now, while Spider-Man's demise was only temporary, his return marked a transformation, turning Spider-Man into basically a monster with newfound abilities that actually allowed him to take the victory. This battle stands out as one of the most crushing defeats Spider-Man has ever endured. Number 8. Juggernaut. Juggernaut is one of the few Marvel heavyweights you just shouldn't cross paths with. Even the heroic heavy hitters know this, but when he rampaged through New York City like an unstoppable force in The Amazing Spider-Man number 229 to 230, Spider-Man had no choice but to intervene. Now, it turns out, getting involved was far more than Spider-Man could really handle. Once Juggernaut set himself in motion, nothing could halt him, and Peter learned this the extremely hard way. Over 2 whole comic book issues, Spider-Man exerted all his might against Juggernaut, and it was all futile, as a regular spider trying to stop a train. Spider-Man could do absolutely nothing, and he got completely pummeled. Now, of course, Spider-Man did eventually take the win, but it wasn't anything he physically did that got him the victory. It was actually his brain that stepped in. Juggernaut actually ended up being caught in wet cement, and I gotta be honest, I really don't think that wet cement would actually stop this guy, but they had to get Spider-Man out alive somehow. Number 7, Doc Ock. Dr. Octopus is one of the Spider-Man villains that has a very serious claim at being the primary adversary to Peter Parker. He has consistently given Spider-Man enough grief to cause wrinkles, but then Otto is also one of the few villains to absolutely defeat his hero. When Otto was beginning to lose his life, he managed to find a way to transfer his consciousness into the body of Peter Parker, while transferring Peter's consciousness into his failing body. Peter ended up completely passing away, at least temporarily, inside the body of his adversary, while Otto gained an incredibly powerful body and a new, slightly heroic personality, becoming the superior Spider-Man. But Spider-Ock, or Spock as the fans call him, changes things. He took his genius and experience and applied it, making an awesome new suit, spider bots, and mechanical arms. He also straight up took villains to their graves and even single-handedly defeated the Sinister Six, taking the living brain as a trophy. He completely dumps MJ, but starts a relationship with Anna Maria Marconi, who became a popular addition to the Spider-Man canon. He purged Carly Cooper of the Goblin serum, helped Aunt May walk again, got Peter his PhD, mainly for clout, and built a scientific empire that would make him a multi-billionaire. He made himself a much more efficient hero than Spider-Man ever could be. Or was. Number 6, Magic and Colossus. Now, yes, neither of these guys are villains. Not normally, but they definitely became villains, and that's what we are going to talk about. In the Avengers vs. X-Men event, a group of 5 X-Men were granted quite the power boost in the form of the Phoenix Force, which came to Earth for Hope Summers. Now, thanks to Tony Stark, it was split into 5 parts, and that's when it inhabited the bodies of those 5 X-Men. The mutant siblings Colossus and Magic were 2 of these X-Men. Now, Spider-Man is physically no match for either one of these guys, not with the Phoenix Force at least. When he ended up facing them both in the 9th issue of the event, Spider-Man got completely beaten to a pulp. It was brutal, but of course, he still has that charming personality and beautiful brain. It turns out that when one of the avatars for the Phoenix Force is defeated, the power of the remaining avatars gets boosted up even more, and it ended up that there were only a few of them left. Even though he was completely wrecked, Spider-Man gives them a little innocent reminder of the fact that if one of them is defeated, the other one will gain even more power. Now, we don't get to see the fight that takes place between the 2 of them. Instead, we get to see the unconscious bodies of both of them, with Spider-Man still barely standing to let everyone know he got them to knock each other out. But they still completely wrecked the web slinger. Number 5, the Thunderbolts. Thanks to the MCU, Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland, most people believe that Spider-Man and Tony Stark are as thick as thieves. And they are. In the MCU. There was a time where comic book Tony Stark and Peter Parker got along. In the beginning of the comic book Civil War event, Peter was all for Tony's Superhuman Registration Act, and this was partially because of the way Peter admired Tony Stark. But Iron Man was totally using this admiration to his advantage. He used Peter's naivety to convince Spider-Man to unmask himself to the world, which caused untold amounts of problems for the hero, not only in that story, but even outside of it. It even sort of indirectly led to the split between Peter and Mary Jane Watson. Now, one of Tony's methods for enforcing the Superhuman Registration Act was deputizing villains to hunt down Captain America's forces as the Thunderbolts. When Spider-Man made his getaway from Iron Man's forces, the Thunderbolts were on him like hotcakes, and if it wasn't for the intervention of the Punisher, Peter could have 100% lost his life, and he almost did. Number 4, Carnage. The red symbiotes always seem to be the worst of the worst, and the one that would be born from Venom himself seems to be the worst of the worst of the worst. When Eddie Brock was briefly detached from the Venom symbiote, he was imprisoned, and his cellmate was none other than Cletus Cassidy, a psychotic serving 11 consecutive life sentences in Rikers Island. Now, when Venom showed up and bust Eddie out of prison, it produced its first offspring as a result of Thanos seeking the Infinity Gems out in space, which is the weirdest reason, but that's what happened. Now, Spider-Man learned the hard way that Carnage was absolutely no joke. The Carnage symbiote was not vulnerable to the same things that Venom was, and his strength and speed were greater than both Spider-Man and Venom. Not to mention, he was absolutely ruthless, even more aggressive than Venom, and with all the lethal of Venom and not a smidge of the Protector. The Wall Crawler had to call for help to fight Carnage, and from none other than one of his own villains. Number 3, Venom. That villain that he ended up calling in for help against Carnage was none other than Venom himself. Now, Venom has had an interesting time in comic books, going from villain to anti-hero, back to villain, and now to just straight up a hero. But when he first showed up, he was absolutely just a villain. Eddie Brock and the symbiote shared a personal vendetta against Spider-Man, and they united in their hate for him, literally bonding over it. Venom posed a huge threat to Spider-Man, becoming a villain that gave Peter a run for his money more than once and in more than one medium. The symbiote's unique ability to bypass Spider-Man's spider sense stripped the hero of his primary defense that has helped him on so many other occasions. And on top of that, Venom was even stronger and more durable than Spider-Man, with sharp, pointy teeth and a hell of a lot of extra symbiote abilities that the webhead was just not prepared to deal with. Their initial encounters were intense, with Spider-Man often on the receiving end of brutal beatings. This forced Spider-Man to adapt his fighting style drastically, as the symbiote-covered villain was relentless in his pursuit of the hero's demise. Number 2, Green Goblin. He threw Gwen Stacy off the George Washington Bridge, orchestrated the Clone Saga, and wiped out Ben Reilly right in front of Peter Parker. Norman Osborn is absolutely Spider-Man's #1 adversary, simply for the fact that he has caused Peter more emotional pain than any of his other villains, even Doc Ock. Now, obviously, everything that I mentioned was Norman, but Harry Osborn was also the Green Goblin, adding physical and emotional turmoil to the whole thing. Now, I don't think I need to pick one event in particular, but I would say that Gwen Stacy was the worst of the bunch. Green Goblin proved to Spider-Man that he is not able to save everyone. Even though Peter was so close, he still failed, and when you think about it, Green Goblin made it so that Peter was the one to shoot the web that broke Gwen's back. He may not have known that's how it would go down, but he lucked out with that move, not only terrorizing Peter, but completely psychologically tormenting the poor guy. And finally, in at #1 today, it's The Spot. Jonathan Owen is a villain that only well-versed fans of Spider-Man would recognize, or it used to be that way before Across the Spider-Verse came out. Now, as The Spot, Jonathan hasn't always been the most relevant villain of Peter Parker. He often ends up on lists of Spider-Man's worst and unknown villains. I mean, when he first confronted Spider-Man and announced his villain moniker in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 99 in 1985, the hero hit the ground laughing. Literally, he fell on the ground and was laughing. It was bad. But it made it all the more embarrassing for Spider-Man when the Spot actually defeated him. Spot threw Peter in and out of his dimensions using his hole portals, and he landed more than a few good punches on the hero. The Spot doesn't hit hard, but as he says, even the strongest of trees can be felled by sufficient strokes from even the smallest of hatchets. Yes, he said that. I know it's weird. Eventually, he left Peter discombobulated, with Black Cat having to help him back to his feet. He got his own back eventually, but still, the Spot took him down.
We all know Spider-Man as the friendly neighborhood web slinger, but with everything life has swung at him, it's a marvel he's maintaining that mantle. If you know anything about Spider-Man, you know that he loved Gwen Stacy. So finding out that she had relations with one of his worst enemies and twins came from it, that took a toll mentally. Pile on that the twins think Spider-Man is their dad, and they hate him for abandoning them, and later, when they were older, attack him at Gwen's grave. That's a lot. This all took place in the Sins Past arc. MJ helped Peter piece together the parentage of the twins using a letter given to Peter, as well as a conversation she overheard between Gwen and Norman. Peter is, of course, heartbroken by the news. He does try to tell the twins the truth. One of them, Sarah, believes him, but the other, Gabriel, doesn't. Until Gabriel returns to the Osborn lab and sees that Norman has built suits so the twins could follow in his footsteps. This storyline has been retconned, but the character of Gabriel did return later on, becoming the Grey Goblin. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Gwen Stacy put in some backbreaking efforts to help out her title character, and I do mean that literally. After the unfortunate incident, Peter Parker is racked with guilt and hangs up his super suit for good. That is, until he watches Gwen's graduation speech. Her words inspire him to become everyone's favorite friendly neighborhood spider again, just in time for him to save New York from being destroyed by the villain Rhino. Fun fact about me, watching Gwen's death was the first time I ever cried on a plane. I was a casual superhero fan at the time, so I literally didn't see it coming. Let me know down below a time when a movie caught you totally off guard. In the limited series Spider-Man Reign, we meet a Peter that has seen better days? The series is set in a future with no heroes. The city has fallen into ruin. At this point, Peter has grown old and has not been Spider-Man for a long time and doesn't plan to do it ever again. A bright spot is that Peter did get to marry longtime love Mary Jane. The two loved each other very much, but learned the hard way that Peter was radioactive, and anything that came out of him was also then radioactive. If you know, you know. Prolonged exposure to this radioactivity caused MJ to develop cancer and ultimately pass away. Us readers see that this has done a number on Peter's emotional well-being. He feels extremely guilty and is grappling with the fact that his superpowers, which were supposed to be a good thing, ended up being his lover's demise. Back to the land of Hollywood blockbusters. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is only about 17 years old when he is brought back to the land of the living from being snapped away in Avengers Infinity War. Peter is just trying to make it through a school trip, but of course something goes horribly wrong. To summarize super quick, big monsters attack Earth. Spider-Man must fight these monsters with the help of new hero Mysterio. But surprise, Mysterio is a villain and was faking the monsters using drone technology. Him and Spider-Man have a big final brawl in which Mysterio does perish. At this point, we're like, good for Peter, go home, drink water, see your girlfriend. But pretty much right when Peter gets home, a video is released worldwide using sound bites from the Mysterio battle to make it seem like Spider-Man had been the one on a destruction spree, and topped it off by exposing Spider-Man's civilian identity. Once again, all of this is happening to an already severely traumatized 17-year-old. The after effects of this involve Peter being attacked for weeks from every direction, and then ultimately losing all of his family and friends. Spider-Man's whole thing is that he is a human with spider abilities, which I'm sure you already knew. But once, the opposite happened. I am referring to a moment in the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 2 line. This story centers around Spider-Man and the Spider Queen. In an effort to gain control over Spider-Man, the Spider Queen kisses him. It isn't until later that he realizes the kiss of this Spider-Woman is going to be a bit bigger of a problem than he initially thought. Peter slowly starts to turn into a spider. It starts with growing extra eyes and then limbs before finally stopping when Peter is completely changed and under the control of the Spider Queen. The man spider that was Peter was designed to basically be an incubator for the Spider Queen's offspring, but the transformation happened too fast and Spider Peter didn't make it. The Spider Queen, not happy, destroyed her entire lab, leaving the spider husk behind. She should have stayed longer though, because shortly after her departure, human Peter burst out of the husk, reborn. I can't even imagine the toll that this would have taken on Peter, but the bonus is that he now has some new spider abilities. Before, he had to spend a lot of time making his own webs, but now his body just does that. It's all about the small victories. Now, you've heard of Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Spider-Pig, but get ready for Spider-Jesus. And I am being so serious right now. Spider-Man and Jesus have one thing in common. Both were crucified at one point. In the Uncanny X-Men number 191, our heroes are up against sorcerer Kulan Goth. Goth decided to turn all of downtown Manhattan into the Middle Ages. Anyone inside or coming in the city gets transformed into what their medieval counterpart would be, including many of our favorite heroes. The only hero in town that is unaffected is of course Spider-Man. An intentional choice. Goth flat out states that he shall have his revenge against the spider. In this medieval Manhattan, Spider-Man is hunted down and beaten until he's ultimately crucified. All the heroes, now back to their senses, fight to free Spider-Man and defeat Goth, but he's too powerful, so Spider-Man has to watch as all his friends get taken down by one, and it's brutal. Spider-Man tries to fight, but succumbs to his injuries. Good news is, Doctor Strange, once freed, was able to turn back time, so it all never happened, and Spider-Man lived to fight another day. To Goth, love the drama. Next time, maybe try a Renaissance fair. Sorry, a medieval fair. Peter Parker, across the board, has got permanent bad luck. And for the Peter of Earth 2149, that manifested in turning into a zombie. What makes this so tragic is that even though Peter's body is decaying, his mind isn't. The way to kill a zombie in this universe is to destroy their brain, meaning that zombified individuals are aware of what they're doing but are consumed by insatiable hunger they literally can't stop. Right after Spider-Man gets bit, he tries to get MJ and Aunt May to safety, but he turns into a zombie. zombie. He does attack them both and then presumably ends their zombie versions as well. The extra brutal part is he knows what's happening, and he feels all of the pain and guilt afterward. The zombie infestation on Earth gets so bad that the super zombies start jumping across the universe in search of food, making this everyone else's problem too. Spider-Man is the first of the zombies to have his first evil hunger sated, and he is eventually able to make it to a universe in which a cure might be found, and he uses his science skills to craft one. It's nanites that basically remove the dead cells in a zombie, which makes them disappear. The final piece to this gruesome puzzle is that Spider-Man might be one of the only zombies that experiences pain. If you're squeamish, skip 10 seconds. When he runs out of his regular webs, he can use his veins. I don't think I can properly express how much I hate this. Spider-Man does a lot of dying without dying, and I'm so tired for him. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 700, Spider-Man faces off against longtime nemesis Doc Ock. Doc Ock and Peter Parker have switched bodies. However, the machine used simply beams brain patterns into the other person's body, so it's less of a full switch over and more like extreme mind control. In Peter's body, Doc Ock goes around ruining Peter's life and is just generally being a menace. The entire time, Peter is literally fighting for his life. Doc Ock's body is dying, so Peter has to find him soon, or at least attempt to get his body back. Once they find each other, it doesn't go as Peter hoped. The golden Octobot was what switched them, so Peter uses that to switch them back. Or at least he would've, if it weren't for the special shield Spidey Doc built for his body. Before Doc Ock and Spider-Man, both of them have the same memory of Uncle Ben. The true Spider-Man realizes that because his brain with his memories is still in his body, a link with Doc Ock exists. Spider knows that he's not coming out of this, so he uses the link to show Doc his life story, hoping it will inspire him to turn to the good side. It does, and Doc, a changed man, vows to become the superior Spider-Man. Our poor Spidey was left to the fate of dying in a foreign body, and the last remnants of him are his old memories and the voice in the back of Superior Spider's head. This next one is literally nightmare fuel. I don't think I would have survived, super or not. I'm talking about the horrible brawl between Spider-Man and Kraven the Hunter. The fight starts out awful. Kraven shoots Spider-Man with a poison dart because he's a hunter, he has to be on theme. Then he makes man hallucinate dead people, hits him with a stick, smacks him against a building, nets him, shoots him with a rifle, again sticking to theme, until finally burying Spider-Man alive for 2 weeks. Important to mention, Spider-Man's emotional context before this all went down is that his best friend had just died, as well as an accomplice of his. So Spidey's going through a bit of a crisis and is generally grappling with the fact that he might be scared of dying, and then is promptly shoved 6 feet under. Spider-Man's stronger than me. I think I would have just stayed there. I'm being so serious with you right now. But Spider-Man is not one to give up so easily and does escape. Kraven's reasoning for this? Over the years, Spider-Man has beaten Kraven, and in his words, humiliated him, and Kraven just wants to finally prove he was better than Spidey. Kind of a last hurrah at the end of his villain career. I gotta say, I think one of the worst things that happened to Spider-Man was the first death most Spideys would have seen. While Spider-Man has gone through a lot in his many lifetimes, one thing that has remained consistent in traumatizing almost every web slinger across the Spider arcs was the death of Uncle Ben. This has caused many versions of Spider-Man to become the masked hero in the first place, has led others to some pretty dark places, and once caused an emotional crisis for Spider-Man when he came face to face with the man responsible for the act. It's one of the main things that haunts Spider-Man throughout his entire career, and as the recent addition to Sony's Miles Morales Spider-Verse film suggests, that it is an inescapable part of any Spider-Man story. Spider-Man is one of the greatest heroes ever, but even he does things he isn't proud of. Here are the worst things Spider-Man has ever done. Kicking it off with giving up his marriage to Mephisto. What even was that? Peter, this whole thing was super frustrating because it was just kind of strange. I get why it happened from the outside, like Peter and MJ had been together for decades and Marvel wanted to explore different stories and relationships for the hero, but people loved this couple, so having them break up was definitely gonna ruffle some feathers. But they didn't even break up in like a normal way. Peter literally made a deal with the devil. They didn't just break up. The devil deal erased their marriage from existence. It never happened. And that's where a lot of people were lost. This whole thing happened because Aunt May wasn't feeling so good and Peter couldn't bear to let his mother figure go. So when presented with the option to save her, he took it. It just so happened that the thing Mephisto wanted in return was Peter's marriage. Moving into some more like recent-ish activity, one of the most iconic fights of Spider-Man's career was Kraven's Last Hunt when Kraven buried him alive. It's now decades down the line and Spider-Man has given the villain a taste of his own medicine. Last summer's Amazing Spider-Man 33 featured an evil-infused Peter Parker getting some long overdue revenge for what happened to him back in the 80s. This time around, Spider-Man is the one hunting Kraven and throwing him 6 feet under. In his clouded with evil mind, Peter doesn't particularly care that the Kraven he's chasing now isn't the one that threw him under, deeming him close enough. The whole comic is showing a much colder side to Spider-Man readers aren't used to seeing, especially towards the end where Peter throws a weapon down into the casket, saying, "In case you want to skip to the end," before closing it up and throwing the dirt. This was of course a reference to the original comic when Kraven ended it all with that same weapon. So yeah, Peter is pretty ruthless when he is forced to let go of his good guy nature. And he did not stop with Kraven. Evil Peter went after everybody. Tombstone was in the hospital on life support, and after burying Kraven, Spider-Man paid him a little visit, went right over to the ventilator and just yanked that out of the wall, escaping into the night in a flash of lightning, laughing his head off. In the end, the hospital staff was able to bring Tombstone back, but then Spider-Man went after Norman Osborn and Paul and Mary Jane. Luckily, no one was fatally injured in the end, but it wasn't cute. Spider-Man has generated millions in property damage over his crime-fighting career, and it's not always his fault. But in the case of Amazing Spider-Man 1, when he is trying to join the Fantastic Four, it was intentional. Spider-Man is looking for a super team with a salary, so he swings by the F4 headquarters. More specifically, he swings through a window, which triggers the defense measures. In this case, it's a big plexiglass cage that cost the team tens of thousands in today's money. Spider-Man is first, breaking into their headquarters, and second, potentially damaging very delicate, very expensive machinery. I can't imagine that this would ever help his case, and after he does end up escaping, he fights the team and literally throws some of them around the room. It's only when he finds out that the F4 wouldn't pay him that he actually gets out of there. Now this is pretty tame in comparison to like burying someone or unplugging their life support, but it's not exactly Peter's finest moment either. Peter Parker's roast of Harry Osborn in the PS5 Spider-Man 2 game is completely out of pocket, and yet surprisingly not that out of character considering he had a sim connected to him at the time. It deserved a spot because it's not funny, but it's a little funny. Peter, MJ, and Harry are having a disagreement because Peter has been acting weird. Both MJ and Harry ask Peter to give up the sim suit. Peter doesn't want to, he's on edge. It's also important to note that Harry is visibly sick in this moment. When Peter is showing hesitation to give up the suit, Harry makes a side comment and Peter took that personally. For some reason, he decides to go straight for the jugular with the response, "Why don't you pop some more pills and say what you're really feeling?" Harry was not doing a thing to Peter in this particular moment. He was literally just sitting in a chair and Peter went off. So Peter, please relax. Peter's show of strength against Captain America and Amazing Spider-Man 23 was unexpected to say the least. To set the scene, Peter is on the run and he hasn't looked worse. Very much at the end of his rope, as he is running through an alley, Captain America suddenly turns up to try and talk and help out the young hero, but again, Peter is not even at the end of his rope anymore, he's let go of it. Out of pure frustration, Peter grabs Cap's shield from him and full on slams it into his face hard enough for it to crack. He cracked Captain America's shield on Captain America's face, and that is so embarrassing, I'm gonna be so honest. And adding salt to the wound, Peter did escape, slipped away. Okay, so this next one isn't really Peter's fault because he didn't know, but he does hate himself for it. So in the limited series Spider-Man Reign, we meet a Peter that has seen better days. We are in a future with no heroes. The city has fallen into ruins. At this point, Peter is old and has not been Spider-Man for a long time, no plans to ever do it again. A bright spot is that Peter got to marry his longtime love, Mary Jane. The two loved each other a lot, but learned the hard way that Peter was radioactive and anything that he produces is also radioactive, so like if you know, you know. Prolonged exposure to this radioactivity caused MJ to develop cancer and ultimately pass away. This is not an easy thing for anyone to deal with, but Peter feels extremely guilty and is grappling with the fact that his superpowers, which were supposed to be a really good thing, ended up being his lover's demise. Adding on top of that, as Mary Jane was laying in her hospital bed, Peter had to step out to stop a crime, only to find out that in his absence, she passed on, and that guilt has and will weigh on him for the rest of his life. Now again, This is not really Peter's fault. Is it his fault? It's up for debate, though this is definitely one of the worst things Peter has done and has had done to him at the same time. I am referring to that time he became a zombie in Marvel Zombies' Dead Days. After being bit, Spider-Man desperately tries to get MJ and Aunt May to a safe location, but the zombification happens too quickly and the hunger kicks in, and I'm sure you can guess what happened to the two women. The brutal part is, Peter knows what's happening and he feels all the pain and guilt afterward. Again, he didn't want to do it, the hunger made him do it. The zombie infestation on Earth gets so bad that the super zombies start jumping across the universe in search of food, making this everyone else's problem too. Spider-Man is the first of the zombies to have his evil hunger taken care of. He eventually makes it to a universe where he can make the cure, so happy ending at least. The 80s were the time for a black-suited Peter Parker to constantly be put in stressful situations. Okay, so we are looking at Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, issue 110. In this one, Peter's first love, Betty, was kidnapped by the villain Sin Eater, and it was not looking good. Spider-Man teams up with Daredevil to get her back. The two crash into the room and quickly disarm and knock out the villain. But in a very out-of-character moment, Spider-Man literally starts to hit a guy while he's down. It gets to the point where Daredevil has to physically step in between the villain and Peter. This, of course, ends in a fight between the two heroes, with Daredevil thrown out the window, and him admitting that if Spider-Man was in a more sound frame of mind, he would come out on top. Spider-Man is not one to really permanently end somebody, but every once in a while, mistakes do happen. A pretty nasty one took place in Spider-Man vs. Wolverine. Towards the end of the comic, Spider-Man and Wolverine are fighting in a graveyard. Now, both of these heroes are like the strongest and the toughest there is, which means they aren't exactly pulling punches. In fact, they're putting everything they have into their attacks. Also present in the mix here is a human woman named Charlie that both parties are trying to keep safe. Unfortunately, Charlie got a bit too close to the action and set off Peter's spider sense. Thinking it was Wolverine, a very stressed and tired Peter turned around and threw everything he had left into a punch. The kind of punch a Wolverine could survive, but definitely not your average person. The thing is, though, is Charlie wanted that to happen. Wolverine literally explains that on panel, so now Spider-Man is being haunted by this guilt when it was what she really wanted all along. It's completely messed up, but when is his spider trauma not?